Picture feeding your entire household with nothing more than a quarter in your hand. During America's harshest chapters, families worked miracles with mere pennies. And today, we honor the ingenuity of those incredible parents who made magic in their kitchens. We'll begin with a dish that quite literally kept hope alive: poor man's stew. And wait until you get to number 24. You won't believe it's now served at luxury restaurants. Let's uncover the most resourceful budget meals that carried families through desperate times. Poor man's stew. Known as the lifesaver of 1931, this stew was a Depression-era staple when meat was priced beyond most people's reach. Here's the brilliant twist. A small cube of salt pork, no bigger than a thumb, could add depth and flavor to an entire pot of root vegetables. Families would keep the stew bubbling for days, tossing in anything they had: an extra potato here, a few foraged greens there. One mother in Chicago became a national headline when she kept 6 people fed for an entire week on a single pot, spending just 32 cents total. But the real beauty wasn't just about stretching ingredients. It was the way it united neighborhoods. Households traded vegetables and tips, turning one person's tiny pork piece into a community's dinner table solution. And guess what? Some trendy eateries are resurrecting this forgotten comfort food, now charging $15 a bowl for what once cost just pennies. Speaking of ironic twists, you won't believe the origin of Hoover's casserole. Hoover's casserole, the name? A sarcastic nod to President Hoover, who once promised a chicken in every pot. Most folks couldn't even afford the pot, let alone the chicken. So they created their own version of luxury, a thrifty casserole named after him. This dish was as simple as it was clever: elbow macaroni mixed with stewed tomatoes and whatever bits of cheese could be salvaged. Savvy home cooks would collect breadcrumbs for weeks to sprinkle over the top, creating a golden, crispy finish that gave the illusion of something elegant. In 1932, it cost only 18 cents to feed a family of 6. Today, the same ingredients would cost around $4, but it's still being served up in tight-budget households across the country. Next up is something that sounds simple, even boring, until you hear how it saved families in one of the coldest winters on record. Milk toast. Sure, the name doesn't exactly scream excitement, but in the bone-chilling winter of 1933, this humble meal was a godsend. Imagine this: hardened slices of stale bread, too precious to toss, revived with warm milk, a small pat of butter, and if you were lucky, a dusting of sugar. It wasn't about extravagance. It was about survival with a touch of comfort. The memories tied to it were even richer than the taste. Kids would wake up to the smell of bread toasting, watching as their mothers transformed yesterday's scraps into something cozy and reassuring. And in an unexpected twist, milk toast is making a comeback. Food bloggers today are dressing it up with cinnamon, vanilla, and even caramelized bananas. That 5-cent breakfast? Now it's a $12 brunch item. Speaking of reimagined breakfast ideas, get ready for something even more unexpected: Depression-era pizza. Depression-era pizza. It might make Italian nanas cry, but in the 1930s, this version of pizza was a lifesaver. When every coin counted, families got creative, using thin bread dough as the base and topping it with whatever they had on hand, sometimes even ketchup in place of tomato sauce. One woman in Philadelphia became a local legend when she discovered that adding a pinch of dried herbs to ketchup gave it that pizza parlor flavor. Toppings? Those were improvised. Families saved bits of cheese all week, grating it over the crust on Sunday nights. If cheese was out of reach, they'd even slice potatoes thin and lay them on top. Cost to make one pizza back then? Just 7 cents. And now, those same Depression-era recipes are resurfacing on budget food blogs, proving once again, smart cooking never goes out of style. Now let's talk about a sauce that defined ingenuity: salt pork gravy. Salt pork gravy. This was the ultimate lesson in doing more with less. A single 3-cent slice of salt pork wasn't just breakfast. It was the foundation of flavor for an entire week. Every morning, mothers would carefully render the pork in a skillet, collecting every precious drop of fat, nicknamed liquid gold. That golden grease, with just a little flour and water, was whisked into a rich, silky gravy that transformed dry bread into something people looked forward to. In coal mining towns, this gravy was such a staple that stores began selling salt pork on credit, knowing full well families could stretch it into a dozen meals. Even now, some Southern diners still serve this dish, honoring the resourcefulness of their ancestors. And speaking of stretching small ingredients into big meals, just wait until you hear what they did with potato soup and salt pork. Where one potato could fill every belly, this was the reality of Depression-era survival. Let's talk about potato soup with salt pork, a dish so resourceful it deserves a gold medal for ingredient stretching. Potato soup with salt pork. If stretching meals were an Olympic sport, this soup would take the gold. Families learned that a single potato, sliced impossibly thin, could appear like a whole batch when floating in hot broth. The real magic? They used the same sliver of salt pork left over from morning gravy to flavor the pot again. Mothers got clever, starting the broth with boiled potato peels to boost the flavor. Then came the thinly sliced potatoes. Some mothers even fooled their kids into thinking it was a new soup every night. One day, adding a carrot, the next an onion. One family in rural Ohio reportedly fed 6 people for 4 days using only 3 potatoes and 1 piece of pork. Now, if that's not culinary wizardry, what is? Dandelion salad. Next up, a salad that cost absolutely nothing. Not a cent, just a backyard stroll. In 1932, when grocery stores were a luxury, sharp-witted mothers turned their lawns into supermarkets, gathering dandelion greens for what they called spring survival salad. Kids had roles too. The younger ones picked flowers while the older ones hunted for roots. Believe it or not, a Chicago newspaper even published a dandelion map showing the best spots in local parks for foraging. The secret? Soaking the young leaves in salty water to remove the bitterness. Then came the twist, tossing them with leftover pickle juice vinegar. Doctors at the time even promoted it, calling it nature's multivitamin, richer in iron than spinach, and absolutely free. Cabbage and noodles. This next dish didn't just feed families, it united neighborhoods. In 1933, cabbage and noodles earned the nickname Five Family Feast. The system was simple but brilliant. 5 families would pitch in 2 cents each to buy a single head of cabbage. The trick was to slice it ultra thin, like ribbons, making one cabbage look like a bounty when mixed with homemade noodles. But the real genius? Mothers created a bartering economy. They saved and cleaned eggshells, crushed them into calcium-rich powder, and traded it with farmers for eggs. The yolks were used for golden noodles, the whites saved for special Sunday meals. One clever mom in Cincinnati was crowned the noodle queen because her pasta was so thin it vanished into the dish, doubling the appearance of volume. The math? 1 cabbage, 5 eggs, and some flour fed 20 people, and all for around 10 cents. This dish grew so popular that when cabbage ran low at the general store, they created a waiting list called the Cabbage Club. Bread soup. Moving on to a meal that made stale bread taste like a feast, bread soup. This humble soup proved that absolutely nothing went to waste. Even the tiniest crumbs had value, earning it the nickname Magic Dust Soup. Tiny bits too small to see would thicken the broth and add body. Here's the discovery that changed everything. Bread actually tasted better stale. Toasting it until nearly burnt, then crushing it into powder, released a deep, nutty flavor. So rich, some swore there had to be meat inside. 1 onion, vegetable scraps, and the remains of a loaf were enough to create what many called miracle soup. And the creativity didn't stop there. Some even saved used coffee grounds to add a rich, brown color and depth to the broth. In New York's Lower East Side, Moskowitz's Bakery became a legend for their Sunset Special, giving out leftover bread every day at 5 p.m. sharp. The line grew so long that women brought chairs and turned the wait into cooking tutorials. Locals called it Breadline University, a place where tough times turned into community and creativity. One grandmother's version of the recipe became so famous, she charged a penny to write it down and earn enough to feed her entire block for a month. Now let's move to a meaty classic that still lives on today, hamburger gravy. How did a single pound of ground beef end up feeding 3 entire families? Believe me, this Depression-era trick was pure genius. Let's talk about hamburger gravy, the ultimate master of disguise. Back in 1932, 15 cents could buy a pound of hamburger. And that 1 pound? It became dinner for not 1, but 3 households, thanks to a clever kitchen illusion. Here's what they did. They'd brown all the meat in a skillet, then, brace yourself, they'd pull out half of it before continuing. Then came the sleight of hand. Flour and milk were added to the pan to create a creamy gravy that gave the illusion of double the meat. But that wasn't all. Their not-so-secret weapon? Stale bread cubes, toasted until golden brown, then layered under the gravy. It tricked the eye and the tongue. Kids swore every spoonful was packed with extra beef. This trick got so popular that a whole Detroit block started a gravy exchange. Each family would take turns buying just 1 pound of beef, and together they'd feed 15 people. If you're blown away by how our grandparents could stretch pennies into feasts, hit that subscribe button. I dig up these forgotten gems every week. And trust me, the next one will surprise you. Now, let's move on to a sweet treat that turns sorrow into smiles, sugar sandwiches. When candy became a rare luxury during the darkest years, mothers turned scraps into comfort. All they needed was bread, butter, and a dusting of sugar. They lovingly called them fairy sandwiches. The glistening sugar looked like a sprinkle of magic. They cost just a penny each, less than a third the price of even the cheapest candy bar. And here's the heartwarming part. Teachers noticed kids at school trading away their fancy store-bought snacks for these humble sugar sandwiches. Why? Because every mom had her own version, and kids swore theirs was best. Some toasted the bread for a sweet crunch, others added a drop of vanilla saved from Christmas, or dusted them with cinnamon when they could. The most creative moms pressed decorative patterns into the sugar using paper doilies, making the sandwiches look like something out of a tea party. At Lincoln Elementary School in Kansas, these sweet creations became such prized trading items. The principal had to step in. Kids were giving away meat sandwiches just to get their hands on them. Eventually, the school banned sandwich trading altogether because the sugar ones became more coveted than real desserts. One mom's recipe was so beloved that she started selling her sandwiches for 2 cents apiece on weekends. And that's how she put her daughter through college. Next up, a dish where 1 slice of bologna tricked everyone into thinking they were eating a meat-packed casserole. Let's dive into the brilliant simplicity of bologna casserole. This dish proves just how inventive people got when times were tough. Imagine this. A single slice of bologna, shaved paper thin, costing just a nickel, turned into what looked like a meat lover's fantasy. The secret? Chop that 1 slice into tiny cubes, then layer it throughout a casserole of potatoes and onions. The illusion was complete. The real showstopper? This dish didn't just fill bellies. It won first prize at local church potlucks, beating out casseroles made with much costlier ingredients. In 1934, a Detroit newspaper even called it the greatest illusion of the Great Depression. Now let's talk about goulash, but not the one you might be thinking of. This next version had a secret twist that completely changed the game. Think you know goulash? Think again. This was your great-grandmother's survival version, and it had a nickname, Ghost Goulash. Why ghost? Because there was a taste of meat in every bite, but the meat itself was nowhere to be found. Here's the mind-blowing part. Families would save bacon grease all month long. Then, when it came time to cook, just a spoonful of that grease was added to a dish of macaroni and tomatoes. That smoky flavor made it feel like there was beef hiding in the pot, even when there wasn't a scrap of meat. One spoonful, and suddenly the whole table was full of smiles and full bellies. And trust me, before we move on, you want to jot down the next one, because mayonnaise biscuits are about to completely change how you cook on a budget. Mayonnaise biscuits. You won't believe this one. When eggs and butter became too expensive to keep on hand, someone made an astonishing discovery: mayonnaise. Just 3 spoonfuls of it could stand in for both. And here's the kicker. The biscuits turn out fluffier than the original versions. This revelation didn't just spread, it ignited Depression-era communities. Why? Because one 10-cent jar of mayonnaise could make 60 biscuits. Housewives began holding Miracle Mayo meetups, where each woman brought a spoonful to contribute. Even upscale hotels began using the recipe on the sly. Guests were none the wiser. Up next is something truly unexpected: potato and hot dog soup. And the mystery ingredient in this one? It's going to leave you speechless. Potato and hot dog soup might be the most unconventional soup you've ever heard of. When one hot dog had to serve 6 mouths, resourceful Depression-era cooks made culinary magic. They'd slice that hot dog whisper thin, but the real genius? They fried the tiny slivers until crisp, giving them the look and crunch of bacon bits. The game changer? They didn't throw away the water the hot dog was boiled in. They saved it and used it as the soup's base. Add in diced potatoes and just a pinch of coffee grounds. Yes, coffee grounds, and you get a rich, smoky broth so flavorful people begged for the recipe. Before we go on, don't go anywhere. You'll want to hear about the survival bread that literally saved an entire town in the brutal winter of 1933. Survival bread. The name alone hints at the story behind it. Imagine trying to make bread when you've run out of flour entirely. That's exactly what happened in a small Minnesota town during the winter of 1933. Then someone made a game-changing discovery right in their own backyard. Acorns. When ground into powder and mixed with even a scrap of leftover flour, they could form dough. Here's the brilliant twist. Soaking acorns for 3 days took out the bitterness. Just 1 cup of acorn meal, blended with 2 tablespoons of flour, could yield 6 loaves. The news spread so fast, newspapers called it the miracle of Minnesota. Now let's talk about chipped beef on toast, a dish the military banned because soldiers got sick of seeing it. But during the Depression, it was worth more than gold. Chipped beef on toast wasn't just a meal, it was a legend. Soldiers used to call it SOS, short for something we can't say here. But during the Depression, this former military meal turned into a neighborhood feast. All it took was 2 slices of dried beef, which moms would shred so finely, it nearly vanished into the pan. Add a simple gravy of milk and flour, and suddenly it looked like a rich dish packed with meat. Entire blocks would pool their pennies to buy a single pack of beef, stretching it into enough SOS to feed every family nearby. If you thought that was inventive, just wait for this next one. Let's talk about mock apple pie, a dessert so convincing it won blue ribbons from county fair judges who didn't realize it had 0 apples. Mock apple pie might be the greatest food illusion ever pulled off. When apples got pricier than beef, resourceful cooks pulled a fast one. Their secret? Broken crackers, topped with cinnamon and soaked in lemon-flavored water. And here's where it gets wild. This imitation pie won first place at the 1934 Illinois State Fair, beating out real apple pies. The judges' reaction when they learned the truth? Utter disbelief. One winner even admitted she'd been making the pie for months, and not even her apple farmer husband knew the difference. Next up, Depression-era meatloaf. And what replaced the meat will make you question everything you thought you knew about comfort food. Depression-era meatloaf may be the most daring food fake of them all. When ground beef prices skyrocketed in 1932, thrifty families invented mystery meatloaf. It contained only a handful of actual meat, but here's the mind-bending part. It was held together with oatmeal soaked in leftover coffee. Sounds strange? Here's the brilliance. The coffee-colored oats mimicked the color and texture of meat so perfectly, no one could tell the difference. One mother in Pennsylvania used just 4 ounces of meat and fed 12 people. Her recipe became so popular, the local butcher began handing out coffee grounds for free with every sale of meat. If your family passed down a Depression-era secret recipe, drop it in the comments below. I read them all. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Now let's talk about navy bean soup, the humble dish that changed minds and menus forever. Navy bean soup became legendary thanks to one unexpected discovery. In 1932, food lines were handing out navy beans in bulk, and most folks weren't thrilled until one clever cook in Boston had a breakthrough. She grated a single potato into the pot and cooked it until it disappeared. What happened next was incredible. The potato gave the broth a creamy richness that made it taste like it was loaded with butter and cream. That version of the soup spread like wildfire. People were actually trading meat rations for extra beans. Just a cup of navy beans, a potato, and some water could feed 8 people and keep them full for hours. And the best part? The soup tasted better the longer it sat. The longer it simmered, the richer this soup became. Families often started a pot on Monday and stretched it through the entire week, tossing in a handful of beans each day to keep it going. But here's where it gets really fascinating. This humble soup became such a hit that even upscale restaurants began serving it. Of course, they charged $2 a bowl for what cost just pennies to make. Today, believe it or not, that same soup is back on menus at trendy spots for a whopping $12 a bowl. Now up next, cornmeal mush, a dish that started on Depression-era stoves and somehow made its way into modern brunch menus at hip cafes. Cornmeal mush, it might just be the most flexible food of the Depression. This golden dish was a true shapeshifter. For breakfast, add a little sugar and you've got a warm cereal. Let it chill, slice and fry. It turned into instant pancakes. Come dinner time, season it with salt and pepper and it became poor man's polenta. The real magic happened in Chicago's Italian neighborhoods, where immigrant families, unable to afford real polenta, realized cornmeal mush was practically the same thing. They shared their discovery with their American neighbors, teaching them how to fry leftover mush in save bacon grease for a crispy exterior and creamy middle. People literally lined up, bartering for a plate. Here's the kicker. That same recipe is now being sold for $18 a plate with fancy toppings. Back then, 5 cents of cornmeal fed a family of 6 for 2 entire days. And speaking of transformations, get ready for poor man's pudding, a dessert made from scraps that ended up being served at millionaire dinner parties. Poor man's pudding. Ever heard of a dessert so clever it made the wealthy jealous? This one did just that. With nothing more than stale bread, a spoonful of sugar, and a secret ingredient you'd never guess: leftover coffee. Families whipped up a dessert that looked and tasted like rich chocolate pudding. Even high society women begged for the secret. The trick came from one Philadelphia mother who figured out that soaking stale bread in strong coffee overnight gave it the deep flavor and texture of gourmet chocolate. When she served it at her daughter's wedding, guests thought it was imported European dessert. It cost just 3 cents a serving. The story made headlines when a fancy restaurant owner tried to buy her recipe for $100. And before you start craving sweets, let's dive into the sandwich that saved an entire school during the most brutal winter of 1933, the baked bean sandwich. Baked bean sandwiches, this unlikely hero changed school lunches forever. In 1933, when a small-town school in Ohio could no longer afford its lunch program, one clever cafeteria worker came up with a life-saving idea. Her solution? Mashed baked beans mixed with just a splash of pickle juice. The surprising result? A filling that almost mimicked the taste and texture of sandwich meat. But here's the real brilliance. She toasted the bread in bacon grease, tricking the students into thinking they were eating fancy meat sandwiches. Word spread fast. Even students who brought their own lunches from home began trading them for the school's bean sandwiches. The idea took off. Schools in 3 states soon adopted the recipe. Best part? Each sandwich cost just 2 cents. A local paper even dubbed it the sandwich that saved our schools. And get this, today a trendy food truck in Portland sells vintage bean sandwiches for $14 a pop. But you're not ready for what's next. Mystery mock chicken, a depression dish so convincing it fooled professional chefs and made it onto menus without anyone catching on. Mystery mock chicken, the most delicious food hoax of the era. When chicken cost an unbelievable 40 cents a pound, a resourceful woman in Detroit came up with a fake-out that changed everything. She combined ground bologna, crushed crackers, and a clever spice mix to recreate the taste and feel of Real chicken. Here's where it gets wild. She molded the mixture into drumstick shapes using popsicle sticks, breaded them, and served them at her husband's restaurant. Not a single diner suspected a thing. The dish became so popular, neighboring restaurants started asking who their chicken supplier was. She kept her secret for 3 full years, until a local newspaper broke the story in 1935. And the final twist? Her mock chicken actually won first prize in a chicken cook-off, judged by professional chefs. They only learned the truth after awarding her the blue ribbon. And the prize money? Just enough to buy a month's worth of real chicken. Today, food historians call it the greatest kitchen illusion of the Depression. And just wait until you hear about our final dish, depression cake. It's staging such an unexpected return that it's gone viral on TikTok. And the reason why might just shock you. The comeback king, depression cake. This might be the most remarkable revival in culinary history. Known today as Crazy Cake, it's racked up over 50 million views on TikTok. But its roots? They stretch back to 1929, born out of pure necessity when ingredients like eggs, milk, and butter were totally out of reach. Here's the twist. This cake uses none of those ingredients and still delivers an incredibly rich, chocolatey flavor. The secret? A wild chemical reaction. Vinegar combined with baking soda, which creates air pockets that give the cake a soft, fluffy texture, even without eggs. Back then, women treated this recipe like a treasure, often passing it around coated, so no one could swipe their special version. One bakery in Chicago stumbled on it during a milk shortage, and to their surprise, their sales actually doubled. So, why is it making waves again now? It's accidentally vegan, safe for allergies, and made entirely with budget pantry staples, costing less than $2 in total. Meanwhile, modern bakeries are selling slices of this for $8 a piece, even though our great-grandmothers were whipping it up for just pennies. Some folks today even call it survival cake because it helped families keep birthdays, weddings, and holidays special, even in the darkest days. From mystery mock chicken that tricked professional critics to acorn-based survival bread that kept entire towns alive, These recipes remind us that true resourcefulness shines brightest in the hardest times. Think about it. Ghost goulash with no visible meat and depression cake that's now topping viral charts. Our grandparents weren't just cooking, they were working culinary miracles. What's wild? These recipes are resurfacing just when we need them most. With today's grocery prices climbing, these Depression-era hacks are turning into modern-day solutions. That $18 plate of gourmet polenta, it's just our grandparents' cornmeal mush in disguise. If you've got a treasured family recipe that helped your ancestors through lean times, share it in the comments below. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe for more recipes with stories, because behind every dish lies a legacy, and every legacy matters.